first. A little bit of hype, a little bit of conversation happening right now, which is that I've got to be honest. I think a lot of people in Canberra watch too many movies. Like, remember the Men in Black movie where the agents had the ability to press a button, look you in the eye and say, oh, you completely forget everything that's going on. And perhaps the Prime Minister thinks that he is a Jedi Knight, a Jedi Master, who has the capacity to just tell you what you know is different.
Let me see your identification.
You don't need to see his identification.
We don't need to see his identification.
These aren't the droids you're looking for.
These aren't the droids we're looking for.
He can go about his business.
You can go about your business.
Move along.
Move along.
Now, we've made this point a few times, and perfect examples about the ability to say, forget what I had to say, or reality is not what you are living, is, of course, the central promise out of that 2022 election, which was that cost of living would go down. Things would get better if you chose the party that became the government. Remember, no ifs, no buts, no asterisks, no maybes, no carry the one, no but maybe on Tuesday somebody else. A Labor government will lower the cost of living. And then that far right-wing university, the University of Melbourne, among others, was able to view that in 2022, into 2023 and now into the verge of 2024, that more than half of all of Australians are only just, and I mean just, making ends meet. Now, of course, we were told that all the way through, when times were particularly difficult in the first full year of the government in 2023, that they were all hands on deck. Every idea was being used. Everything they could possibly, every lever they could possibly pull for cost of living, they would pull. But then, of course, they decided not to cut petrol taxes while petrol was hitting all-time highs. It's still bloody high around the country, but certainly particularly high in Brisbane. But the government said, no, none of that business, because, of course, they thought that it wasn't a real political issue. And, of course, elections were a long time away. And there are people who have been willing to make this point to the Prime Minister directly, an opposition you would assume, but then people from traditionally Labor areas, like the Fowler MP and KK killer, Di Lee, who actually asked questions about this very specific thing to the Prime Minister's non-answer inside the Parliament. You see, the Jedi mind trick doesn't work on the people who represent the working class of the country, as opposed to the people who fly at the front of the plane or the private plane, because they know that the only time they have to engage with the working class is once every 3 years, and they'll probably vote for us because we're better than the other guy. And then there's, of course, the reality for millions of people around the country who are trying to pay off the biggest asset they will ever own. Remember, in Australia, the way it works is that you do your best to save as much as you can to be able to get the deposit, to then buy the house that you may well live in by yourself, you may live in with your partner, you will eventually trade up and have kids. You'll take care of the garden every Saturday for the best part of, 30 years? And the plan is that you can amass wealth through this because, guess what? You've got to play financial kaplunk before you move into the older stages of your life, and that's as much money as you will have to be able to take care of yourself and your family as you see out the final years of your life. Well, what has been the reality of this government? The reality is the elbow dozen of interest rate rises. And again, let's go to the far right-wing commentators at The Guardian who actually have been able to work out the consequences of the Reserve Bank continuously increasing them, including after the government got a hand-picked version of the person they wanted to actually run the bank. In fact, if you have a look here, as we've shown you many times before, that almost half of Australian mortgage holders are under financial stress. That was towards the end of last year. It's exactly the same this year. This was just before the November increase, and as you can see, the monthly increases are $1,200 on a $500,000 loan, $1,800 on a $750,000 loan, and $2,500 on a $1 million loan. Or think about it this way. Australians that have been paying off mortgages in the past 12 months are now staring down the barrel of having to find an extra $14,500 to pay it off this year as opposed to before the current mob became the government. $21,000 for anyone who's trying to pay off something about $750,000. And, well, with many prices being over $1 million around the country, the likelihood is that the number of $29,000 is an underestimate compared to where many people are. That's extra money that's all been having to be found. Now, of course, the reality is, again, cost of living, a major issue all the way through the first part of the government in 22, the entire year of 23. And as we were moving towards the end of things last year, what was the government doing? Well, as they were moving towards confirming a massive budget surplus, well, guess what? There was nothing for people who needed something to help them when it came to the cost of living. Nothing for people who were trying to find the extra, anywhere between, $14,000 and $30,000 a year to pay off their house. Nothing for the people who need to fill up their car or their truck to go to work or to move things around this big, beautiful country. Instead, though, what the expectation was that the headline numbers were great because all the people who talk about politics, many of which will be hate watching now, say surplus equals tick, surplus equals awesome, where the reality is that for Australians, even Melbourne University is telling you that more than half of Australians are finding it difficult. This Christmas just gone, people literally queued for food so they would have enough money for a present for their families. A cost of living inquiry, which has been going around the country, having a look at things, is telling us that people who have jobs are still living in their cars, and to make sure that they have water to drink, they get ice at the start of the day that'll keep what food they have cold, and then they will drink that melted ice as water. That was evidence that came out of a hearing in Perth. But summer was supposed to be the big reset, because we know that last year the political calculation of the Prime Minister was that the voice would be able to be the ultimate distraction, that it would be the easy achievement of a Prime Minister searching for his place in Wikipedia history. Well, of course, Australia didn't vote no. They voted hell no. Even in Victoria, they voted no. So the Prime Minister wasn't able to have that achievement. Instead, the reality of people's lives continued to become difficult. Yet as this year turns over, we're being told that things are about to change for the better, and the constant focus of every lever that they could be pulling, and I've shown you a couple that they didn't pull, are about to be pulled in favour of those to be taking care of cost of living. Because you see, this poll came out just a couple of weeks ago. Now, obviously, it's the middle of summer, there's cricket, tennis, lots of other things to watch. But more than 70% of Australians believe that cost of living is the number one issue. More than 80% of Australians believe the government hasn't done enough. So the Prime Minister wants you to believe the message, just like not the droids we're looking for or the men in black, that he's all about cost of living. So you see, they floated in the past few days that there was going to be a special meeting of every Labor MP in the country. It'll cost about $500,000 to fly them and their staff to basically be meat puppets in the studio audience of a Prime Minister announcing some changes when it comes to taxation. I'll get to those in a moment or two's time. But this is all really about the multiple days of speculation and then the multiple days of selling whatever the announcement's going to be. It's about trying to, for want of a better term, own the message. And if you own the message, then you're on the front foot. If you're the one deciding what everyone's talking about in politics on that day, you win the day. When you're a Prime Minister that is in the polling situation that he's in, you need to win every day, and then a couple of weeks, and then eventually months. And then people turn around and say that everything is awesome, everything got better. Well, of course, what we know is about to happen here is that one of the ways that the government has been trying to say, get ready, we're pulling on that lever that we haven't been pulling on, is to say that particularly the stage 3 tax cuts are things that need to change. Too much money for people that are just monocle-wearing billionaires or people who are earning over $100,000. There is a slight difference, but apparently not, for the left wing of the Labor Party. So the Prime Minister is out there saying to the very people who, people like Dai Lee represent in the Parliament, like middle to low-income workers, that the government's on your side. So they were literally out there saying this week, and the Prime Minister was hinting at cost of living relief, particularly for low and middle income earners. But I've got to say I'm rather interested here. Again, just talking about the levers that were pulled or not pulled. You see, this was the government that actually decided to take away the low to middle income offset, which put simply meant $1,500 guaranteed tax returns. Now, it was introduced as part of COVID. And as I had said, regardless of what anyone took into the last election, I would have screamed from the mountaintops that this needed to be extended for 12 months. Now, obviously, Albo's not going to be listening to me. There's a chance that the former Prime Minister may well have listened to me. But The point is that people needed that $1,500. There were surveys that were telling us that, 36% of Australians factor into their ability to pay bills their tax return. So even if they weren't able to get a big tax return, there was a guaranteed minimum of $1,500. That was for low and middle income workers. So the Prime Minister now wants to get credit for the very people that he made a decision not to help. They can, of course, turn around and say, well, it was the last mob. Well, they have control of the Parliament. With the Greens and David Pocock, Lambie and the rest, they would have been able to pass that in an afternoon. But, of course, they didn't. This affected 10 million workers. 10 million workers is how many people were affected by this decision and why it was a bad decision not to find a way to extend it for 12 months. Remember, this was the budget that turned around and produced, $20 billion surplus? So they had the extra cash. But one of the reasons we were told that you couldn't have more of your money for the past 12 months to help pay for all of the things that I've just talked about and everything else that you know you've been struggling to pay for. How's this the logic from the Assistant Treasurer, not a backbencher, somebody in the room making the decisions about why the government needed the $1,500 back?
It's important that we are ensuring through sound economic management that we don't make the inflation problem worse.
You see, if you have more of your money, you'll spend it. And if you spend it, then that will lead to more inflation. More inflation leads to interest rates and everything gets worse. So then we come to the issue of the stage 3 tax cuts. The Prime Minister out there again saying today that everyone gets a prize.
I support tax cuts and everyone will be getting a tax cut.
But you see, the problem for the Prime Minister is not whether people get a tax cut or not. It's about whether the people who were told they were getting a very specific tax cut will be getting that tax cut. That's the point. Now, lefties and much of the media will try to turn around and say that it's all about the numbers. No, it's about the promise. But because the assumption is that most people don't earn $100,000, so everyone over $100,000 is a Teal or a Liberal voter or probably even sometimes a Greens donor, so they don't matter. They're not going to be part of the Labor coalition that's required to run the country. But of course, these tax cuts aren't just something random. They're something that was passed by the Parliament, that Labor literally voted on. This is the legislation that they voted on. Mm-hmm. Then, of course, they turned around and said in the lead up to the last election, in fact, in an interview on this channel, that they will not be changing anything to do with the legislation that they passed. Yet, as we know, the expectation is that those changes will be announced tomorrow. And yes, it does look like people under $150,000 may end up with a little more money, but don't forget they've already received previous tax cuts. The matter of principle, and whether that matters or not, we will find out all collectively in the next few weeks. But the matter of principle here is whether something that you voted for in the Parliament, promised to people when you looked them in the eye, is something you actually deliver, or there's a yeah but. There's no asterisk on the promise of vote Labor and cost of living goes down. There's no asterisk on $275 when it comes to power bills. And there's no asterisk on the people who make up 11% of the population but pay 55% of the tax to be able to keep some of their own money. You know, the same principle that apparently was not okay when it was $1,500 for 10 million workers. So while much of the media will say, genius move, much of Twitter will cheer it all on, for those of us who watch every day the news, we may have a new nickname for the Prime Minister, and that will be Albo One Kenobi.
Move along.
Move along. Move along.
Now, as we know, Pat Cummins is the cricket captain of Australia. He is very successful as a bowler. He's a great bloke on the field. Off the field, a little bit woke, but that's okay. He's just trying to stay in with the cool kids. But sometimes he's a little each way elbow, like that time he was in the ad for the energy company.
Why is this spa not hot?
We're supposed to be saving on gas.
Which one of us was saving on gas?
Find your energy deal today at Alinta Energy.
But then apparently he complained to Cricket Australia that he didn't like the sponsor that presumably gave him some money to appear in the ads. If not, he needs a better manager. And of course, they ended up losing that sponsor. Now, interestingly, the financials for Cricket Australia are worth paying attention to because they announced a $17 million loss last year. So perhaps the Alinta money may well have been held. Sorry, how dare I actually follow the details here. Now, of course, Cummins, as the captain of Australia, more than happy to drape himself in the Australian flag in the desperate hope that Bay 18 will somehow love him. But as we have heard today, his plan is that Australia Day should not be on January 26.
I absolutely love Australia. I think it's the best country in the world by a mile, and I think we should have an Australia Day, but I think we can probably find a more appropriate day to celebrate it.
Yeah, just like Cricket Australia's Chief Financial Officer, I probably wouldn't be taking advice from Pat Cummins on this. Instead, I'm going to focus on the local mayor who represents the area that we were talking about before. You know, the actual low to middle income workers, the immigrants to the country. Frank Carbone is, of course, the mayor of Fairfield, and I prefer his take on Australia Day.
We can't keep up, Paul. We do have plenty more. We've got about 10,000 flags, but we keep on ordering them. We're having businesses phoning us up now if they can get flags to give out to their people. We've been overwhelmed with support from local communities. We all need to be united and make sure that we stand together on this wonderful day, which is for us to actually celebrate who we are, and that is Australians.